Welcome, everybody. The first thing I'm going to say is, Charles Michel, please join me. He's a colleague at the Crossmobile Research Lab, and we are used to call him experience designer. So he's one of the guys that actually takes all the knowledge we produce, which actually sometimes is together, right? And he put it into real context and tried to change the world by using neuroscience. So today, we're going to talk about an exciting topic, which is designing for the brain. So basically, we're going to be talking a bit about two different big topics that are being used by different applied contexts, such as film and advertising, in order to enhance the way people experience them. One of those topics is called multisensory experience design, and the other one is called affective design. So before we start, let's begin with a bit of an introduction. So the last 2 decades have seen like a big growth of neuroscience research, in which we have seen stuff like this, like real images of the brain, processing different stimuli of the environment. This neuroscience revolution has a question mark here, because we don't know if this revolution is over or is still happening. We do know that basic neuroscience is giving like lots of research, but we still have a lot of challenges in applying that knowledge to real contexts, such as film.
So we can basically see this revolution, instead of a revolution, rather an evolution of the science and research informing design and creative processes. So as Carlos said, I call myself sometimes an experience designer, but I'm a chef. I studied as a culinary arts in France, and now I'm doing research with Carlos and Charles Pence at Oxford, understanding how the senses connect and interact in our brains in order to design more pleasurable, more intense experiences, and often just being more memorable to the audience.
So one of the contexts in which neuroscience is starting to kind of like discuss potential applications, and some people have shown like big interest in this context, which is filmmaking. There is actually like a growth of interest in both sides in start communicating and producing a strong body of knowledge that can actually inform both sides. This is one of the very first papers that came out from Hesson and colleagues, which is called Neurocinematics, the Neuroscience of Film. If you have the time, this is a fabulous article trying to use different neuroscientific techniques in order to understand how the brain processes film.
So there's just neurocinematics, but there's also neuroaesthetics on that neuroscience revolution that we're talking, neurogastronomy, and all the neuros applied to almost any field. Neurocinematics, for example, there's another paper who came out talking about how the cognitive psychology and the editing could change the way people perceive actually the emotions transferred by the content, the image.
But something that we have to say is that this relationship is not new. Actually, psychology and film have had a really long relationship, and actually a natural relationship. If you see, one of the main aims of both psychology and film is to understand human behavior. So why not using both means to try to understand human behavior together? So this relationship has been long, and here are some of the facts that actually show us that film and neuroscience and psychology have had this long relationship. And I just want to highlight two of them. Actually, neuroscience have provided like lots of inspiration for Hollywood and other filmmaking contexts by setting like the parameters of different mental health, disease, and stuff like that in order to create characters that represent these diseases. And also, movies are frequently used in brain research. So that's something that people in the film industry don't know much about. But actually, we use lots of different segments of movies in order to evoke emotions and to understand how the brain processes emotion. Because you are experts in designing affective experiences and multisensory experience, which is something that we're going to talk about later. So what is it about this thing of neuroscience and filmmaking? Definitely not something like that, which is something that comes up to our minds generally when we think about neuroscience applied to a context such as film. So it's something a bit more complicated, and that's something you have to bear in mind when thinking about neuroscience. Neuroscience is a very tough field, as well as film, I would say. We both have lots of technical like knowledge that needs to be taken into account in order to approach human behavior. So although it seems very attractive at the beginning, if you start understanding how the different machines that we use to measure brain activity or the different like way we approach those processes in the brain, you start to realize that it actually needs like not only those machines as the ones we can see here, but also like a lot of technical knowledge on experimental design and concepts such as emotion, attention, memory, learning, and how they happen to be working in the brain. So here you can see some of the main toys, as we call them in the lab, that we use to understand the things that are happening in the brain of people. So we have eye tracking to measure eye movements of people. We have fMRIs, or functional magnetic resonances, in which we put people in these kind of boxes and we present stimuli. It's kind of like a very unnatural situation, but it kind of helps us to understand how the brain processes different stimuli.
It's mapping where in the brain it's taking place, the activity is taking place. It's the same thing as the EEGs up there, all the wires. And also physiological measures to see maybe how if your hands get wet, it means you have a strong emotion. If your heartbeat changes, if your breathing rate changes, also means that you're having an emotion, a physiological response to a psychological state.
Exactly. And one of the things we want to say before we continue with this slide is ethics. And this is something really important to talk about when you talk about neuroscience and applications of neuroscience. I'm not going to spend much time talking about ethics, but if you want to discuss that, we can talk about it later. I just want to say that I firmly believe that by taking into account the way the brain works, we can design better experiences for humans. And I think that's kind of like the main thing. It's not about manipulation, it's about taking into account the way we work in order to design better experiences for us. So let's move to an example of how we can use these techniques. And if you can please click on this video, this will start showing you one of the things we started doing. So if every dot you can see there is one person looking to that video. This is a movie that a Colombian producer created. And we were kind of like trying to see how visual attention was guided by different shots in this kind of trailer. So one of the things we start seeing with these type of methods is that by recording the way the eyes move on a movie, we can understand how people are engaged and how the attention are engaged. And we can actually use that knowledge to start enhancing the way we want people to look at our videos, at our movies.
For example, in the direction of photography, but also in the editing, and just the close-ups, how close you want to be, and all those knowledge, let's say that filmmakers have an intuitive approach to, an experience-informed approach to, but this can give insights on how the attention works, basically.
So this looks quite nice, but I have to accept that in order to get those type of measures, we have to get lots of numbers and statistics, and it's not that fun. But it's something.
The results are often really
difficult to manage, but
precise, but
at the end they give us some really interesting insights. Mm-hmm. So let's move to the two main topics we want to talk about. So the first one is going to be multisensory design, and the second one is going to be affective design. For tackling these topics, we're going to do some little experiments that we hope you to take actively part of them. So let's start with the first one. So do you think you can tell whether a liquid is hot or cold based on the sound it makes when poured into a receptacle? Do you think that's possible?
Do you think actually you can hear temperature? Because temperature is something that you actually feel. It's proprioception and touch, the integration of two properties of sensory modality. But here, if we can play maybe the four.
Yeah, maybe. So the task here is going to be very simple. We're going to play these 4 sounds. This is the first one. So the idea is that
we hear them all.
I think they are not working. But let's move. So the idea is that we have 4 different sounds, and what we did in this experiment was we worked with a sonic branding company in London that is called Condiment Junkie.
That's not the same.
And this company took the sound of a pouring liquid and made some digital modification in order to make the sound of the liquid either hotter or colder. And what we actually found, which was something we wanted you to find, was that, actually people are very accurate in finding which sounds correspond to hot liquids and which sounds correspond to cold liquids.
Just one thing here is that it's exactly the same sound, just digitally changed. So using a computer, we changed some properties, some pitch and intensity of the sounds, so people would perceive it having a different temperature. So the slide that comes after explains an example.
Exactly. So something we have to say here is that with this kind of experiment, we started understanding that there are some concepts that although we think they are part of just one sensory modality, they are perceived in a multisensory way. So you can actually hear temperature. So let's see how can we apply this very simple experiment and very simple principle to, for example, advertising. So here we're going to have 3 ads. Don't play them yet. So in the first ad, we have the normal sound of the ad. Is an ad of a hot liquid. In the second one, we modified all the sound using the same principles that we used in the previous experiment in order to make that sound hotter. And in the last one, we did exactly the opposite. We made the sound colder. So we're going to play the first 3 seconds of the 3 ads, and we're going to see how they change. Stop there, and go to the next one. Stop there, and then the next one. So a very subtle change. One that was the normal sound. The other one was the congruent one, in which we made the sound of all the ad hotter, or seem to be hotter. And the last one in which we modified the sound to make it colder. So something really interesting we found here is that when we made these modifications in the congruent condition, we found that people actually perceived the drink as hotter, which was something that we expected. Second thing we found was that people liked the ad more because the sound, that's our explanation, the sound is more congruent to the thing we're seeing. And the last thing we found was that people were more willing to try the product in the congruent condition as compared to the other ones.
Something really interesting here is that sensory congruences basically make the senses all pull in the same direction in order to make a more intense and more, let's say, natural experience. So we can enhance that naturalness of the sound in the sense of making it more intense. And well, as Carlos said, people are more willing to pay for it, for example, or to try it, sorry. So
here the concept of congruency is very important. How we transmit or convey a message, taking into account all the different parameters that convey that message in a congruent way. So if I start talking to you and I start saying, hey, I'm really happy, and I kind of like talk in this type of voice, you're going to say that's kind of incongruent. So he's kind of saying that he's happy, but then his voice is not conveying that. So it also happens when we are talking, when we are trying to express emotion, which is something that we're going to see later. Emotions are conveyed or transmit in a multisensory way. If we take into account all the nonverbal channels and the things we are saying and the way our face is projecting emotion and the way our body is moving, we're probably going to convey a stronger message as if we were just using one channel. And it's the same thing that is happening here. If we just had the image of the liquid being poured with a bit of, how do you say, smoke or something, you can actually guess that that's going to be a hot drink. But what if you use a congruent sound? And what if you use the congruent sound not only of the liquid being poured, but the receptacle being placed on a table, hitting that table?
Or what about the temperature of color, for example, to maybe be more congruent to that? And there's something that we can guess. I think it's not proven yet, but we can say it. It's that maybe the feelings of warmth or of the opposite, cold, well, they can be conveyed actually to the emotion. So you can feel warmth just by hearing warmth.
Exactly. So let's move to another example. And with this example, we'll play that song again later. But yeah, thanks. So here, what we want to tell you is that, and based on the last example, is that our brain combines information. So we don't perceive the reality from one sense and then the other and then the other. Our brain puts together all the information from all the senses. And to give you just a quick example, when you're listening to me, you don't only get the information I'm telling you by listening to me, but by looking to my lips. So your visual system combines the information with the thing you're hearing, and you can perceive in a more accurate way the things I'm trying to tell you. So that's kind of like the thing we want to tell you with this. And in this example, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and I want you to use your hand to point to the answer. And the question is, one of these shapes is called Booba, and the other one is Kiki. Which one is Booba and which one is Kiki? Who would say that Kiki is the one on the right side? Or who would say that Booba is the one on the right side? Okay, 95% of the population of the world say that the one on the right is called Booba and the one on the left is Kiki. This is something interesting, right? It makes no sense to have something like this. And if we play the sound again, the one we played at the beginning, would that sound be related to the shape on the right or on the left? Who say the one on the left? Again, most people would say that. So this is telling us something interesting, congruency. So there are different information from the different senses is combined in a more accurate way when it's congruent.
So some values that you perceive from one sense can be attributed to another sense. So the value of hearing Kiki, so that's kind of sound symbolism, well, basically it's attributed to something we see. So again, connecting, having this insight, small insight. This is a really old psychology experiment, probably from the 20s, 1920s. So it can inform how we design the sound, the shapes, everything, the art direction, let's say, of an image.
And to introduce our next example, which is going to be of an application of this, if I ask you, would you say that that shape is sour or sweet?
Sour.
Most people would say sour, and that's actually something really interesting. And this was a study we conducted at Oxford recently. And we were trying to see how different shapes would influence our expectations of taste of a product. And we actually had rounded shapes and angular shapes, and we also had angular typefaces and rounded typefaces. And we also had rounded names and angular names. Say, Clax would be an angular name, and Bloom would be a rounded name. So we asked people, do you think that the product that is inside those shapes is sweet or sour? And what we found was very consistent. People, when people were presented with the angular things, were thinking that the product inside was sour. And the ones that were presented with the rounded things were thinking that the products were sweet. So this is telling us something really interesting. We can actually influence or enhance the expectations of the taste of a product as a function of the design it has. And not only that, but we can also influence the way people are going to perceive that taste, which is a second experiment we haven't finished, but is already showing that data. And this can be applied to a huge variety of things. And Charles Michel is going to tell you a little bit how can we move from these to advertising.
Okay, so what the precedent experiment shows is basically expectations model the way you experience things. So let's think about this image of having a packaging and inside the product. So I'm interested in flavor because I'm a chef. So the way I package something, let's say the presentation of a dish is going to change the actual experience and actual flavors and intensities of the dish itself. So this might be called neurogastronomy. So, but let's think of, and it's something really intuitive. Historically, chefs, they know, everybody knows that the more beautiful the food, the more attractive, but also the more flavor. So let's think about, for example, the expectations we set in a campaign for a movie, the typefaces, the naming, the names, and the sound it produces. Not only the semantic of the name, but the sound it produces can influence the way we expect this movie to be, the shapes, the image, the colors, everything. So this is aesthetics, of course, but it also conveys information that can lead us to live the actual experience. So what's in the package, the actual movie, going to the cinema, is going to probably model it in some way.
So some of the questions that we ask in our lab are questions such as, if I want to present my new movie that is going to have like a highly violent content, what kind of typeface I would use to present that movie? And one of the things that we are starting to think is, how can we design, for example, multisensory posters in order to set expectations to people? So not only posters that have like all these nice images, typefaces, and semantic context, but for example, I have never seen a poster with a particular smell.
It would be really congruent, for example, for the perfume. What if a beautiful perfume, and what if that perfume was actually sprayed in the rooms, in the cinema, before, so people could smell a beautiful thing, maybe under the threshold of perception, so then they would come in and they could almost smell that just by seeing the image and listening to sounds.
And what if we start measuring how these smells, visual aspects, and for example, tactile aspects of the poster are congruent and convey a better or stronger message. These are things that are kind of like the things we see that are going to start happening in the future, but yeah, we're happy to start discussing it because we have some crazy ideas that we want to tell you about.
It's just ideas in the end, and
yeah.
it's about fostering creative minds. Just with these small insights that we can get from research.
Yeah, and something we have to accept to you is that neuroscience or neuroscience measures and techniques applied to the film industry are somehow new, and this kind of like opens a big opportunity for filmmakers and neuroscientists or advertising makers and researchers to work together. I think we have lots of things to share and to discover together, because at the end we meet in wonder. So let's keep talking. I'm going to skip this part, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this experiment that we conducted in London recently, which was, this is published, and maybe some of you have heard about it because it has received lots of attention from the press. Basically what we did here was we designed 3 different atmospheres in order to enhance the perception of different attributes of a glass of whiskey. And you're going to ask me, what does whiskey have to do with the things we're talking? And I'm going to answer that question with another question. Do you think we experience a movie the same way if we watch that movie in one theater or another? Do you think you would experience my talk and Charles Michel talk in the same way if it was here or if it was 2 blocks away in another theater?
The really old theater, for example?
Probably not. And our answer based on this study is probably that's not the thing that would happen.
Okay, so again, the packaging maybe goes even to the space, to the multisensory design. That's why we talk about experience design. If we can play maybe just the red sound.
The red sound, that would be great. Oh.
Doesn't work, okay.
Maybe try another one, maybe the one up.
Okay, so that was just an example. So these guys, Condiment Junkie, London guys, designed sounds to have a taste. So basically people recognize a sour sound, so it's high-pitched and it has some patterns to be sour, and so it enhances the greenness of the room, so it enhances the citrus aroma of the whiskey in this case.
And yes, for example, some research has suggested that high-pitched sounds are more tied to sweet tastes as compared to other sounds. So for example, the sound in the red room and the color red was also used in order to enhance the perception of sweetness. So my question and Charles Michel's question here is, how are we using this way of thinking in order to design environments for watching movies? And one of the things that we have been talking about recently is we were even thinking of why not having different rooms to watch movies in which every person would have a capsule that we would call a multisensory capsule, that would have smells, that would have vibrations, that would have different things that could actually influence the way people would experience a particular movie.
And also depending on the liking of on my preferences, for example, I would prefer maybe to hear this sound or hear or smell this particular thing in this capsule. So this was just a crazy idea we were talking about yesterday.
We can talk about this for ages. So if you have questions, please Twitter or later we can talk about that because we don't have much time. So I'm going to keep talking about the next topic. So the next topic is about understanding and using the language of emotion in the design process. And for this, I just want to give some quick examples and then we will go to the final part of the talk. This is one of the examples in which psychology and filmmaking and like actor training have been working together for a very long time, and is facial expressions of emotion. So here I'm going to ask you, which is the genuine happy expression? Who would say that the one on the left is the genuine happy expression? And who would say it on the right? Okay, more people would say on the right, but we have some people thinking that is the one on the left. So one of the interesting things about these examples is that all the ads we see everywhere and all the movies are packed with facial expressions. But the face has over 40 muscles, in which different configurations of those muscles, subtle configurations of those muscles, help convey emotions. So here, for this particular example, we have two facial muscles that contribute to a genuine happy expression. One is the orbicularis oculi, which is the one that makes the wrinkles on the eyes, which is actually more important than the smile, because I can smile here, and you wouldn't think that I'm happy, right? But if I have my eyes like these little wrinkles that are tied to this muscle that is called the orbicularis oculi, probably that emotion is going to be conveyed in a better way, because our brain notes those little and subtle changes. And the next expression I want to show you is this one, which is a really interesting expression that you can find in lots of ads everywhere in the world, which is actually disgust. Our brain processes that little expression as disgust. So in this context, she didn't receive an award that she was expecting to get. And the camera guy took this picture in a fifth of a second where she was making that expression, because these expressions take no longer than a fifth of a second. So it would be something like this. And that's it. That's everything. So those expressions in the context of evolution were associated to rejecting and having this expression of that there's something that may harm my body. But since we started being social animals, we started using these expressions for disgust. So this is a typical expression when you meet somebody that you haven't seen for a long time, and you say, "Oh, I'm really happy to see you." And they say maybe he's not that happy.
But maybe it's unconscious, the way we perceive that small expression, we do perceive it.
And it's one of the reasons why sometimes we say, oh, this person doesn't have such a good energy, and we don't really know what is happening with that person. But we're actually processing lots of different subtle cues that convey emotion, that actually help us get a representation of what is happening in other people. So this can be used, just imagine all the potential applications of this. Training actors, or just doing research on emotion by bringing actors. So there are huge applications of this. So the muscle of this expression is called the Lavatory Lobby, and there's lots of research about that. So let's go to the final part of our presentation, in which we want to tell you how we see the future of neuroscience and film. And Charles, Michel?
Yeah, so we don't have much time left. There's many things we wanted to tell you more, but basically here, we believe that infusing all the creative industry with neuroscience, it's about infusing. It's not that neuroscience is going to tell you what to do, because the arts have long experience and they know what to do intuitively with experience. But there are, as you could see in this talk, a few insights that can be used. There are many more, but it's about finding them and having also being creative in the research, in having the good ideas that can give us nice insights. Also, for example, for education, basically. So this is in many fields. Then there's another concept, which is synesthesia. We start talking about synesthetic thinking now, which is basically, synesthesia would be the blending of the senses, the mixing of the senses. And the synesthetic thinking would be that's how we call this body of knowledge, this body of research applied. And there's a really nice example in the video, in the next slide, that we would like you to see, and it's about flavor.
So one of the things we want to show you with this video is that, for example, neuroscience and gastronomy are working now together, and they are kind of in an advanced stage now, producing lots of knowledge. And this is one of the examples, visualizing kind of these experiences that they are having.
Something we just found online a few days ago.
So one of the things it would be nice to tell you is that we are actually using neuroscience with this presentation. If some of you remember, this was the sound that we played at the beginning. And there's something really interesting, is that you can increase liking by exposure. So some of you may already start liking more this audiovisual.
Well, now that you say it, maybe less.
Or maybe less, exactly.
But it's interesting to know that can be used.
Exactly.
So here the idea is these guys are selling, of course, food. But they're basically maybe making you taste something or smell something just by connecting the way music and image connect. Okay, so this is just an example of this applied field of research together with creative thinking in, as Carlos said, in order to create wonderful experiences. So here just a short mention on an artistic movement, because we think this is about, great movies are about great arts, basically. It's one of the major arts, actually. So a quote by Jim Youngblood in a book called Expanded Cinema is, "Art is not created, it is lived. The artist merely reports it. Synesthetic cinema is not filmed so much as experienced onto film or videotape." So the different dimensions of experience during the filming, during the editing, during the acting, everything can be infused by this knowledge about how our senses work and how we perceive the world around us.
So the last thing we want to say is that how we see the future, we see neuroscience-inspired multisensory experience design. And this is kind of like the way we kind of think neuroscience is going to start informing different contexts. Please feel free to follow us on Twitter, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.